Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. The ocean does not stand still. Even when it looks like a sheet of glass reflecting the sky, it is quietly moving, rising and falling, following the pull of something far away and silent. That force is the moon, a companion of Earth that has circled our world for billions of years, pulling softly at the waters, shaping the rhythm of the tides. To understand this pull is to listen to a song that has been playing since the first seas formed. A song written in the language of gravity and time. The moon may appear small compared to the Earth, yet its closeness makes its influence powerful. Gravity is a universal force, invisible yet unrelenting, and the moon's gravity reaches across the 250,000 miles of space between it and Earth. The oceans, so fluid and responsive, bend to this invisible call. Wherever the moon travels in its orbit, it pulls the water toward itself, creating a gentle bulge on the side of Earth closest to it. At the same time, on the far side of the Earth, another bulge forms, not because the moon pulls harder there, but because the Earth itself is being pulled slightly more than the distant water, leaving the far side waters behind, as though they are lagging in a slow-motion dance. These bulges are the tides, and as the Earth spins beneath the moon, different parts of the planet pass through them, experiencing the rise and fall of the sea. Twice each day, most coastlines witness the breathing of the ocean. High tide when the water is drawn upward, and low tide when it recedes again. To the casual observer, tides might feel like a simple rhythm of in and out, but hidden beneath that rhythm is the quiet power of celestial mechanics. Imagine standing at a beach at dawn, the tide creeping higher with each minute. The waves lap at the shore, not just because of winds or currents, but because the moon above is pulling billions of tons of water toward it. That same pull is felt across every bay, every inlet, every stretch of coast. The entire ocean is like a living fabric, stretched and relaxed in cycles, its motion dictated by the presence of a faraway sphere of rock shining in the sky. The sun too plays its part. Its gravity is even stronger than the moon's, but because it is so distant, its effect on tides is weaker. When the sun and moon align, their combined forces create what we call spring tides, especially high and low tides that breathe more deeply than usual. When they are at right angles, pulling in different directions, the tides are softer, creating what are called neap tides. This partnership between sun and moon adds layers of complexity, giving the ocean its endless variety of motion. But why does the ocean respond while the land does not seem to move? The truth is that the land does move, ever so slightly, rising and falling in response to the same gravitational tug. Yet rock and soil are far more rigid than water, so their motion is nearly imperceptible. Water, by contrast, yields easily. It flows and sways, creating visible tides that reshape shorelines and mark the passing hours. In this way, the tides become the most poetic evidence of gravity at work, the clearest reminder that Earth and Moon are bound in a quiet embrace. Long ago, before humans charted the seas, animals already followed the tides. Crabs, clams, and countless shore dwellers evolved to move with the rhythm of rising and falling water. Birds learned to feed when the tides exposed stretches of sand and rock. Even now, entire ecosystems are built upon this steady cycle, life adapting to the moon's silent guidance. Every incoming tide brings nutrients from the deep ocean to the shore. Every outgoing tide carries waste and change back to the sea. The ocean breathes because the moon commands it. The pull of the moon has another secret. It slows down Earth's rotation ever so slightly. As tides rise and fall, friction between water and the planet's surface transfers energy, acting like a brake on the spinning world. Millions of years ago, days were shorter, but the drag of tides has stretched time itself, lengthening our days by fractions of a second each century. In exchange, the moon drifts farther away from Earth, inch by inch, as though the bond between them is slowly loosening. Yet even as it retreats, its pull continues, a reminder that distance does not erase connection. For ancient peoples, tides were both mystery and calendar. Before astronomy revealed the secret, coastal communities noticed the link between the moon's position and the sea's behaviour. Fishermen knew to launch their boats with the tides, farmers planted according to lunar cycles, and poets spoke of the moon as a keeper of secrets. In truth, those early observers were not wrong. The moon does keep time, not only in the shifting seas, but in the rhythms of life itself. If you close your eyes and imagine the planet from space, you might see the oceans bulging subtly as the Earth spins. It is like a heartbeat, slow and steady, synchronized with the moon's orbit. Each day this cosmic rhythm repeats, unnoticed by most, yet constant as breathing. The moon does not speak, but through gravity it whispers and the ocean listens. That listening shapes coastlines, feeds ecosystems, and gives us a tangible reminder that Earth is not alone, but forever in dialogue with the sky. In the gentle science of tides we find not just physics but poetry. A simple force, gravity, binds Earth and moon in an endless relationship, and the water is the messenger that makes it visible. To walk along a beach at high tide is to step into that relationship, to feel the unseen strings that tie worlds together. And as the tide slips away, leaving shells and seaweed on the sand, we are reminded that even the quietest forces shape the world more than we know. When you look at the surface of the sea, you may think of it as endless and flat, but it is a restless body shaped by unseen hands. The moon is the most faithful of these hands, steady in its orbit, circling Earth like a watchful guardian. To understand tides more deeply is to understand how the moon and the Earth are forever linked by a thread of gravity, invisible yet unbreakable, weaving cycles of time and motion across our world. Gravity is not a force that acts only on oceans, it is everywhere, binding the Earth to the sun, keeping the planets in their paths, holding our very bodies against the soil beneath our feet. But in the ocean, gravity becomes visible. The moon's attraction pulls entire seas upward, bending their surface into swells that travel around the globe. It is as though the ocean itself is rising to greet its companion in the sky, bowing in silence each time the moon drifts overhead. This soft obedience is the essence of the tide, a constant reminder that nothing on Earth exists without connection. As the Earth turns, the tides migrate around it, creating waves of rising and falling water that shift across continents and coasts. This is why high tide does not come at the same moment everywhere. Instead, it rolls across the planet like a moving breath, reaching one shore and then another, delayed by geography, slowed by the shape of bays and gulfs. A harbour can magnify the tide, trapping water in narrow channels until it rises higher than in the open sea. In other places, the coastline softens the tide, dispersing the moon's pull in gentle ripples. The ocean is not uniform, it is textured, carved by mountains beneath the water and sculpted by the continents. So the tide, though guided by gravity, takes on countless forms, never exactly the same in two places. Consider the Bay of Fundy, nestled between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Here the tides reach some of the greatest heights on Earth, swelling more than 50 feet between high and low. This is not because the moon pulls harder there, but because the bay itself resonates with the rhythm of the tide, like a great bowl of water sloshing back and forth. Each incoming tide arrives in sync with the bay's natural motion, piling water higher, amplifying the lunar effect. It is a reminder that nature's rhythms often combine, one force amplifying another, until the result feels larger than life. On the opposite end, there are places where tides barely whisper. In the Mediterranean Sea, enclosed by land, the tidal range is often just a few inches. The moon's pull is still there, but the shape of the basin dampens its motion. Imagine a vast bowl that is too rigid, unable to slosh freely. There the tide becomes subtle, almost hidden, yet still present, still reminding us of the quiet command of the moon. These differences teach us that tides are not merely about the moon alone, they are about the moon, the earth, the seas, and the shapes that contain them, all working together like instruments in a cosmic orchestra. Life on Earth has tuned itself to this orchestra. Along every coast, species have adapted to the tide schedule, their bodies and habits shaped by lunar rhythms. Mussels and barnacles cling to rocks that are covered at high tide and exposed at low tide. They close tightly when the water leaves them, and open again when it returns. Crabs scuttle out to feed when the receding water reveals prey. Shorebirds wait for low tide to pick worms from the sand. Even corals in far-off reefs release their eggs in synchrony with lunar cycles, timing their reproduction with the moon's phases, guided by a signal written in starlight and water. The tides are not just a physical phenomenon, they are a pulse that life listens to, a quiet metronome that organizes the movements of countless beings. Humans too have listened. Long before we understood gravity, we marked the tides. Ancient fishermen noticed that certain moon phases brought higher waters and better harvests from the sea. Farmers saw connections between lunar cycles and growth, weaving moonlight into their planting calendars. Across cultures, myths rose from the mystery of the tides. Some saw the ocean as breathing with the moon, others believed deities lived within the sea, pushing and pulling the waves. Science later revealed the mechanics, but the poetry remained, because even when we know the reason, the beauty does not diminish. To stand on a shore and watch the tide advance is still to witness something ancient, something larger than our lives. The tides are not uniform in time. Each day the timing of high and low tide shifts by about 50 minutes. This is because the moon itself is moving in its orbit, circling Earth while Earth spins. To catch up with the moon's position, each tide arrives a little later, creating a drifting schedule that coastal communities have long learned to follow. Tide charts are more than maps of water levels, they are maps of the moon's path, reminders that time itself is shaped not only by the sun but also by the moon, that second keeper of earthly rhythms. Spring and neap tides add another layer of poetry. When the sun, moon and earth line up in new moon or full moon, their gravity combines, pulling water more dramatically, creating tides that surge higher and retreat lower. These are spring tides, though they have nothing to do with the season of spring. Their name comes from the idea of water springing forth. 2 weeks later, when the sun and moon are at right angles, their pulls partially cancel, and the tides become modest, these neap tides forming the ocean's quieter breaths. This cycle repeats every fortnight, a lunar heartbeat layered atop the daily rise and fall, a harmony of forces that keeps the ocean alive with motion. The interplay of moon and sun also explains why tides vary so much throughout the year. At times, the sun's path brings it closer to alignment with the moon's pull, amplifying tides into dramatic spectacles. At other times, their angles weaken each other's influence and the ocean moves more gently. These cycles are so dependable that they can be predicted years in advance, a testament to the precision of celestial mechanics. To look at a tide table is to look into the future, to see the moon's conversation with the ocean written in numbers. And yet, even in its predictability, the tide retains mystery. Stand at the shore during a spring tide and you may feel the power of alignment, the ocean swelling higher than usual, rushing inland with unstoppable energy. Stand during a neap tide and you may feel the ocean's restraint, as though it is catching its breath, waiting. In both cases, you're witnessing gravity expressed in water, a cosmic force made visible in the simplest of motions, the rising and falling of the sea. There is also a deeper truth. The tides carry energy. As water moves in and out, it generates currents that can be harnessed, turbines placed in tidal streams converting the moon's pull into electricity. This renewable energy, born from the ancient bond of Earth and Moon, is as steady as time itself, flowing without end so long as the moon circles above. In this way, the tides are not just poetry but power, a living example of how celestial rhythms sustain us. And still, beyond the physics, beyond the technology, tides remain a gentle wonder. To walk a shoreline at dusk and watch the waves creep closer to your feet is to feel the moon's hand brushing the earth. It is to remember that we are part of a greater story, one that stretches from the depths of the ocean to the edges of space. The tides are not simply about water, they are about relationship, about the way two bodies in space speak to one another through gravity. That conversation has been ongoing for billions of years, and it will continue long after we are gone, the ocean rising and falling to a rhythm older than life itself. As we drift deeper into the story of tides, it becomes clear that what seems simple is woven from many threads. The moon pulls, the earth spins, the sun aligns, and together these forces shape the great breathing of the ocean. Yet within this breathing are countless smaller rhythms, layered and complex, as though the sea holds a library of songs, each one written by gravity, geography and time. To see the tides fully is to look not just at the waves along a beach, but at the way entire coastlines, estuaries, and ecosystems are sculpted by this eternal motion. Every coastline carries its own tidal signature. Along the shores of England, mariners long ago learned to measure tides with precision, carving their knowledge into almanacs that guided ships safely through narrow channels. In the South Pacific, Polynesian navigators studied the tides as part of their seafaring lore, blending lunar cycles with star maps to cross open oceans. The tide was not a curiosity to them, but a living compass, a force that could not be ignored. Even now, harbours and ports rely on tide charts, because no ship can enter or leave without respecting the height of the water. Commerce, trade and travel all depend on the gentle pull of the moon. Yet the tide is not only about navigation, it is also about creation. Coastal landscapes are carved by the repeated advance and retreat of water. Salt marshes form where the tides flood flatlands, bringing sediments that slowly build habitats for grasses and birds. Mudflats spread wide in estuaries, rich feeding grounds for migratory flocks that time their journeys with lunar cycles. Mangrove forests grow in tidal zones, their roots submerged at high water and exposed at low, thriving only because the moon ensures a rhythm of both drowning and breathing. Without tides, many of the world's richest habitats would vanish, leaving silence where now there is life. The creatures that live within these places have grown inseparable from the tide's timetable. Sea turtles crawl onto beaches under moonlight, laying eggs in sand that the tide will never touch, yet their return to the sea is dictated by the pull of the moon. Fish spawn in estuaries when high tides bring safety and abundance. Tiny plankton rise and fall in the water column in harmony with lunar light, their movements synchronized with the shifting sea. The moon's influence seeps into every corner of life, not just through light, but through the physical rise and fall of the water itself. In this way, the tide becomes not just a force, but a rhythm of survival. For humans, the tide has always carried both gift and danger. To a fisherman, a rising tide can bring a harvest, carrying schools of fish closer to shore. To a sailor, a miscalculated tide can mean grounding on rocks, or waiting for hours until the sea returns. Coastal villages build their homes with the tides in mind, lifting houses on stilts, weaving daily life around the moon's schedule. In many places, festivals are timed to tidal extremes, people gathering to celebrate when the sea reveals hidden sandbanks, or when waters rise high enough to connect distant islands. The tide is woven into culture as deeply as it is woven into science. But there are mysteries still within the tides. Scientists study how tides move deep currents, shaping the global circulation of the ocean. These unseen rivers carry heat and nutrients across the planet, balancing climates and feeding life far from the shore. In the deep sea, tidal forces stir waters that would otherwise stagnate, ensuring that nutrients rise toward the surface where plankton bloom. Without tides, the ocean might become layered and still, starved of circulation. Instead, the moon's pull keeps it alive, mixing and renewing, a quiet guardian of planetary balance. Even the land beneath the sea feels the tides. In certain regions, water seeps into underground channels with each high tide, raising groundwater levels far inland. The tide's influence stretches farther than we see, shaping aquifers, wetlands, and hidden flows of water beneath our feet. It is a reminder that gravity does not stop at the shore. It touches everything, from the open sea to the smallest grains of sand, drawing them into the rhythm of the cosmos. And as the tide shapes Earth, Earth shapes the tide. The continents block and redirect tidal waves, turning them into complex patterns of resonance. The rotation of the planet deflects currents, spinning them into gyres. The moon itself wobbles in its orbit, creating subtle variations in tidal timing. These layers of complexity mean that the tide is not identical from one year to the next, but rather a living cycle, always repeating, always shifting. To predict the tides is to listen carefully to all these voices at once, a practice that has taken centuries to refine. Yet despite its complexity, the tide never loses its poetry. Walk along a shore at twilight, and you may notice how the tide leaves lines of shells and seaweed, quiet records of where the water has been. Each line marks a moment in the moon's embrace, a signature written on sand. Return the next day, and the line will be higher or lower, moved by the shifting dance of earth and sky. These traces are small, but together they tell the story of gravity itself, a story written not in equations but in salt and stone. There's also something humbling in knowing that the tides are changing slowly over time. As the moon drifts farther from Earth, the tides will weaken, the bulges of water shrinking across the millennia. Days will grow longer, the spin of Earth continuing to slow. Billions of years from now, the Earth and Moon may become tidally locked, showing only one face to each other, forever still in their embrace. In that distant future, the tides as we know them will fade, but for now, they continue, steady and faithful, shaping the lives of those who live along the coasts. The tide also reminds us of connection. We may think of ourselves as separate from the sea, but our bodies too are mostly water, and some studies suggest that even our sleep patterns may align faintly with lunar cycles. Whether or not this is proven, the symbolism endures. Just as the ocean responds to the moon, so too do we respond to cycles, rhythms, and gentle pulls. We live within patterns larger than ourselves, and the tide is one of the clearest reminders of that truth. In the end, the tide is both science and story. It is the physics of gravity, the geometry of orbits, the friction of water on land, but it is also the poetry of movement, the way the sea leans toward the moon and then retreats. It is the quiet assurance that the universe is not random but rhythmic, not chaotic but patterned. To stand by the sea and feel the tide wash over your feet is to be touched by a force that comes from the heavens, an invisible thread tying you to the stars. So when we speak of the moon's gentle pull, we are speaking not only of tides but of a relationship, Earth listening to its companion, water answering to light and gravity. It is a dialogue as old as time itself, written in the language of waves, repeated endlessly across the centuries. To listen to the tide is to listen to the moon, and to listen to the moon is to hear the voice of the universe, soft and steady, guiding us home. The ocean is vast, a mirror of the sky, but it's not silent. Beneath its surface it breathes slow and steady, a rhythm as old as the world itself. To call the tide the heartbeat of the earth is not just poetry, it is truth. Twice each day the sea expands and retreats, like lungs filling and emptying, like a heart sending its pulse across the body of the planet. The moon is the conductor of this rhythm, but the ocean is the instrument, echoing the cosmic music in waves of water and sound. Stand on the edge of a quiet bay, and you can almost feel it. The slow inhale of the tide as the water creeps higher, pressing against rocks and slipping into marshes, followed by the slow exhale as the sea retreats, leaving behind glistening sand. To many this rhythm is background, unnoticed, but if you stop and listen, it is as steady as breath, a reminder that Earth itself is alive with motion. The tide is not random, it is patterned, predictable, yet endlessly varied, shaped by forces that reach far beyond the horizon. This heartbeat of the Earth has no single pace. In some places, it surges with force, rushing in like a flood, then draining away with equal power. In others, it whispers, a mere ripple across the sand. Yet everywhere the rhythm persists, tied to the pull of the moon and the spin of the planet. It is slower than our heartbeat, slower even than the rise and fall of our breath, but it is no less vital. For the creatures of the sea, for the plants along the shore, for the balance of climates, the tide is a pulse that cannot be ignored. Consider how the ocean's breath nourishes life. With each incoming tide, nutrients from the deep are carried toward the shore, feeding plankton that bloom in the sunlight. These plankton in turn feed fish, whales and seabirds, linking the smallest to the largest in a chain of abundance. As the tide retreats, it carries waste back into the depths, cleansing the shores, refreshing the waters. This cycle is a circulatory system for the ocean, moving energy and matter just as our hearts move blood. Without it, life at the edges of the sea would wither, and the rich diversity of coastal habitats would fade. Salt marshes, mangroves and tidal flats exist only because the ocean breathes. These places are half land and half sea, worlds that change by the hour, shaped by the rising and falling water. At high tide they are flooded, alive with fish and crabs swimming through roots and grasses. At low tide they are exposed, a landscape of mud and sand where birds hunt and plants anchor in shifting soil. The tide gives these places rhythm, and in return they give the world oxygen, food and shelter. They are nurseries for countless species, protected by the moon's faithful pull. The heartbeat of the ocean is also a timekeeper. Long before clocks were invented, the tides gave rhythm to human life. Coastal peoples built calendars from the sea, noting how the highest tides came with the new and full moons, how the waters shifted through the months. Fishermen rose and rested with the tide, farmers planted in harmony with its cycles, and travellers set sail when the sea allowed. The tide was not only physical, it was cultural, a teacher that shaped traditions and stories, a reminder that the sky and the sea are always in conversation. And still today, modern science reveals new layers to this heartbeat. Oceanographers trace the tides not only on the surface but deep beneath, where currents shift with lunar rhythms, carrying warmth from the equator to pole. These hidden movements stabilize climates, soften winters, and fuel the great circulations that keep the planet balanced. The moon does not just move water up and down, it stirs the entire ocean, its pulse felt even thousands of feet below the waves. In this sense, the heartbeat of the ocean is also the heartbeat of the Earth itself, a force that regulates not only coasts but climates. But perhaps the most striking thing is how steady this rhythm has been across time. Fossils of ancient corals show growth rings that reveal the length of days hundreds of millions of years ago. Back then, the Earth spun faster, and the moon was closer, so tides came more often, the heartbeat quicker. Over eons, the tide has slowed, stretching days longer, pacing the planet into the rhythm we know now. The Earth is changing, but the tide remains, adapting, still beating, still carrying life forward. To watch the tide is to see patience. Unlike storms which come with sudden fury or waves which crash with noise and speed, the tide moves quietly, steadily, without rush. It teaches us that not all power is fast or violent. Some power is slow, gentle and constant, wearing down stone, reshaping coasts, guiding migrations, building habitats. Its strength lies in repetition, in the certainty that the water will always return. In this, the tide mirrors our own lives, moments of fullness, moments of emptiness, each giving meaning to the other. When poets call the ocean the Earth's slow heartbeat, they speak not only of science but of feeling. There is comfort in knowing that even when we sleep, the sea continues its rhythm, keeping time with the moon. There is humility in realizing that our lives are brief against the scale of this cycle, that the same tide that touched ancient shores now touches ours, unchanged. The ocean breathes, and in that breath, we find a reminder of continuity, of belonging, of being part of something larger than ourselves. So when you next stand at the water's edge, pause and listen. The tide is more than the rise and fall of waves. It is the pulse of a planet, the breath of the sea, the whisper of the moon carried into water. It is a rhythm that has guided life for billions of years and will continue long after we are gone. To notice it is to notice the heartbeat of Earth itself, steady, calm, and eternal. To follow the heartbeat of the ocean more deeply is to notice how it is not only water that moves with the tide, but entire worlds of life and energy. When the tide rises, it is as though the sea stretches outward, touching the land with a soft hand. When it falls, the land exhales, revealing hidden worlds of sand, stone, and living creatures. This rise and fall is not just a backdrop to life, it is life itself, the breath that allows ecosystems to flourish and adapt. Take the intertidal zone, the stretch of shore that lies between the high and low tide lines. To most people, it's a place of shells and seaweed, wet rocks and shifting sand, but to the creatures that live there, it is a world of cycles. A landscape that changes every few hours. At high tide, barnacles, mussels, and sea anemones are submerged, safe and nourished by flowing water. At low tide, they are exposed to air, sunlight, and predators. Their lives are a delicate balance shaped by the heartbeat of the ocean. They open and close, stretch and retract, waiting patiently for the water to return. Their very survival is proof of how life can adapt to the rhythm of the moon. In mangrove forests, the story is different, but no less profound. Here, trees stand on stilt-like roots, half in water, half on land. Twice each day, the tides flood their tangled roots, bringing nutrients and carrying away waste. The roots anchor soil, shelter fish, and provide homes for countless organisms. Without the tide, mangroves would stagnate, their intricate ecosystems collapsing. With it, they thrive, living in harmony with a world that changes hour by hour. They remind us that stability does not always mean stillness. Sometimes it means learning to sway with the rhythm. Even creatures of the open sea are bound to this heartbeat. Whales migrate along tidal pathways, their feeding grounds enriched by currents stirred by lunar pull. Fish schools gather in estuaries when tides bring rich waters from the deep. Tiny organisms like plankton, too small for the eye to see, rise and fall in synchrony with lunar cycles, feeding at the surface during certain moonlit tides and sinking back into darkness when the rhythm shifts. From the smallest to the largest, life listens to the tide, as though the ocean's heartbeat is a signal carried through every scale of existence. Humans too are listeners, though we may not always realize it. In coastal villages, generations have learned to move with the sea, to launch boats at high tide, to harvest clams when the water retreats. For thousands of years, these rhythms were guides for survival. Even today, in a world of technology and precision, tide tables remain essential. Ports cannot function without them. Engineers building bridges and harbours must measure the rise and fall of water. Surfers read the tides to find the perfect wave. The tide's heartbeat continues to shape human life, quiet but undeniable. But the tide is not always gentle. When storms arrive, their energy can combine with high tides, amplifying floods and reshaping coasts. These storm surges remind us that the heartbeat of the ocean is powerful as well as steady, capable of both giving and taking. Coastal communities have long respected this duality, building their homes above the highest waters, watching the moon and sky for signs of change. The tide is trustworthy, but it is never tame. It belongs to the moon, to the earth, to the forces beyond our control, and in that truth lies its power. The science behind this rhythm only deepens its wonder. Tides are waves of unimaginable size, not the small ripples we see on beaches, but planetary waves that wrap around Earth, moving with the pull of the moon. These waves interact with continents, bending and refracting, sometimes amplifying, sometimes diminishing. In certain places, such as the Bay of Fundy, the shape of the coastline matches the natural frequency of the tide, creating some of the highest ranges on Earth. In others, like the Mediterranean, the enclosed basin dampens the tidal rhythm, reducing its amplitude to mere inches. Geography and gravity intertwine, and the result is a heartbeat that changes tone depending on where you listen. These variations shape not only landscapes but cultures. In places with great tides, communities plan entire ways of life around the rise and fall. Fishermen in Nova Scotia wait for the tide to bring the sea closer, while farmers near tidal rivers use the rhythm to irrigate their fields. In places with gentle tides, life moves differently, the heart beats softer but still present. Everywhere, however, the connection is felt, because everywhere the moon whispers to the water, and the water answers in kind. What is remarkable is how predictable this rhythm is. Scientists can calculate tides decades into the future, combining the orbits of the moon and sun with the geography of Earth's oceans. These predictions are astonishingly accurate, a testament to the precision of celestial mechanics. And yet, for all its predictability, the tide feels alive, never mechanical. It carries with it a softness, a patience, a sense of time that is both steady and infinite. To predict the tide is not to diminish its poetry, but to honour it, to acknowledge that even the most mysterious rhythms can be understood without losing their beauty. On a personal scale, to experience the tide is to experience humility. Standing at the edge of the sea, you feel small before its breath, just one heartbeat in a rhythm that has lasted for billions of years. And yet you also feel connected, drawn into the larger pattern of the world. The tide is a reminder that we are not separate from nature, but part of its cycles, subject to the same pulls and forces. Just as the sea bends to the moon, so too do we live within rhythms we cannot see. The turning of the earth, the shifting of seasons, the endless flow of time. There is also an emotional truth within this science. The tide teaches patience. It teaches us to trust that even when the water retreats, it will return. It shows us that emptiness is not loss but part of a cycle, that fullness will follow again. It reminds us that life is not a straight line but a wave, rising and falling, repeating, always carrying us forward. This lesson, written in the heartbeat of the ocean, is one we can carry into our own lives, finding comfort in its certainty. And so, as we listen to the breathing ocean, we hear more than water moving. We hear the voice of the moon, the pull of gravity, the balance of forces that hold Earth in its place. We hear the continuity of life, the unbroken thread of rhythm stretching across eons. The tide is not just a scientific fact, it is a song, and to listen to it is to listen to the heartbeat of Earth itself. The longer one listens to the tide, the more it feels like a meditation. The sea rises, the sea falls, and then it rises again. It is not hurried, not restless, but patient, eternal, like the slow pulse of a sleeping giant. To see the tide in this way is to see the ocean not as a force of chaos, but as a living rhythm. A harmony between earth and sky that shapes not only the coastlines but the spirit of life itself. In the great estuaries where rivers meet the sea, the heartbeat of the ocean merges with the breath of the land. Fresh water flows outward, while salt water flows inward, and the tides turn this meeting into a dance. Twice a day, the salt pushes farther inland, carrying nutrients and brackish water into the marshes. Twice a day, the fresh water pushes back, carrying soil and minerals to the sea. The estuary becomes a place of balance, a mixing zone sustained by the tidal rhythm. Without the tide, the river would simply flow one way, but with the tide it pulses, creating one of the richest ecosystems on Earth. Here, life thrives because the ocean breathes. Along rocky coasts, the story takes another shape. Pools form in cracks and hollows, filled at high tide and left behind as the sea retreats. These tide pools are like miniature worlds, aquariums sculpted by nature, holding starfish, crabs, snails, and tiny fish. They exist because of the regularity of the tide, renewed twice a day with fresh water, yet stable enough to create havens for small lives. Children lean over them in wonder, scientists study their delicate balances, and artists find inspiration in their hidden beauty. Each pool is a reflection of the greater rhythm, a reminder that even in small spaces, the moon's pull is present. The heartbeat of the ocean also shapes human imagination. Myths and legends across cultures speak of the sea's breath as something divine. Some believe that ocean deities pushed and pulled the waters by hand. Others saw the tide as the ocean's longing for the moon, stretching upward in yearning, then falling back in surrender. Even when science replaced myth, the poetry remained. We still speak of the tide as breathing, as living, because its rhythm feels closer to us than cold mechanics. It is a cycle we can feel, one that resonates with the rise and fall within our own bodies. As centuries passed, the tide also became a teacher of patience and predictability. Sailors learned to wait for the right tide to leave port, to ride currents that carried them swiftly to their destinations. Farmers near tidal rivers learn to flood their fields with seawater at the right moments, then let it drain again. Coastal builders measured tides carefully to place foundations on firm ground. The heartbeat of the ocean was not just poetic, it was practical, guiding decisions, shaping civilizations. Even now, vast ports and cities cannot function without the knowledge of tides, proof that this ancient rhythm still governs our modern world. But the tide is not only about human use, it is also about planetary balance. As the water moves in and out, it drags against the Earth, creating friction that slowly slows our rotation. Days grow longer by fractions of a second every century. At the same time, the moon drifts farther away, inch by inch, as though the heartbeat of the ocean is a cost paid in distance. Billions of years from now, Earth and Moon may face each other in stillness, locked forever, the tide stilled into permanence. Yet until that time, the ocean will keep breathing, carrying us forward in its rhythm. In the present, this breathing can even be harnessed. Engineers place turbines in tidal streams, capturing the energy of water as it surges back and forth. Unlike the winds or the sun, the tide is utterly reliable, a clockwork cycle that never fails. This tidal energy is a gift of the moon, a clean, renewable source born of gravity and water. As we look for ways to sustain our planet, the heartbeat of the ocean offers both inspiration and resource, a way to live more closely with the rhythms of nature. Still, beyond all use and measurement, the tide remains most powerful in its quiet presence. To walk along a beach and watch the line of water advance across the sand is to feel the slow inevitability of time. To return hours later and see the water gone, the sand exposed, is to see impermanence written in nature. The tide is constant, yet it is always changing, teaching us that stability and change are not opposites but companions. The ocean's heartbeat shows us that movement itself can be steady, that change itself can be predictable, that cycles are a kind of permanence. Listen long enough and you may begin to sense how the tide connects us to the universe. The pull you feel in the waves is the same pull that holds the planets in their orbits, the same force that binds galaxies together. The moon's gentle tug on the ocean is part of the same gravity that shapes the stars. To realize this is to feel wonder, to know that even as we stand on a shoreline we are connected to forces beyond imagination. The heartbeat of the ocean is also the heartbeat of the cosmos, echoing across scales of space and time. And so, as the tide continues its endless rise and fall, it carries with it a lesson in humility and hope. We are small beside the sea, brief beside its cycles, but we are part of them all the same. The same tide that touched ancient shores now touches ours, unbroken, unchanged. The same moon that pulled at waters 1 billion years ago still pulls today, steady in its orbit. To listen to the heartbeat of the ocean is to listen to the story of Earth itself, written in waves, spoken in silence, carried on the breath of the sea. In this way, the tide becomes more than a physical phenomenon. It becomes a symbol of connection, of patience, of trust. It tells us that emptiness will be filled again, that withdrawal will be followed by return, and that loss will give way to renewal. It is a reminder that even in the vast, chaotic sea of existence there are rhythms we can count on, rhythms that comfort, rhythms that bind. The ocean breathes, the earth's heart beats, and we, in our brief lives, are fortunate enough to listen. If you stand by the shore on a quiet night, you may feel as though the ocean is listening. The waves move with purpose, advancing and retreating in a rhythm that seems almost like speech. Above, the moon drifts in its path across the sky, silent, pale, yet powerful. Between these two, moon and water, there is a dialogue, unspoken but constant, a conversation carried not in words, but in gravity. The tides are the whispers of that dialogue, the visible signs of a relationship that has lasted for billions of years. The moon does not shine with its own light, yet its presence commands the oceans of Earth. Its pull is gentle but immense, reaching across space to tug at the waters below. The ocean responds not with sudden force but with patience, rising and falling in cycles that never end. To imagine this dialogue is to imagine the moon asking, and the ocean answering over and over, day after day, night after night. It is a whisper too vast for ears to hear, but one that shapes the contours of the world. This secret dialogue begins with gravity, the invisible thread that binds all things. The moon, though much smaller than Earth, is close enough to exert a steady pull on the oceans. The water nearest to it rises, drawn toward its companion in the sky. On the far side of Earth, another bulge appears, caused not by a stronger pull, but by the difference in gravitational tug, leaving the distant water behind as Earth moves. The result is two tides, two voices rising in answer to the moon's call, circling the globe in a ceaseless cycle. Yet this dialogue is not uniform. The ocean speaks differently in different places, shaped by coastlines, depths and currents. In some harbours, the tides roar like a chorus, rising high and falling low, while in others the whispers are soft, subtle, barely perceptible. Each shoreline translates the moon's pull in its own way, like languages of water, dialects of the sea. To walk along different coasts is to hear different versions of the same conversation, all connected to the same voice in the sky. The sun, too, adds its part to the dialogue. Though farther away, its gravity is vast, pulling at the oceans in harmony or in tension with the moon. When the sun and moon align, their voices join and the tides rise higher and fall lower. Spring tides, the loudest expressions of the ocean's response. When they are at right angles, their voices clash softly, and the tides diminish, neap tides, the quiet murmurs in the dialogue. In this way, the tide becomes a layered conversation, with moon and sun shaping the tones together, a duet of celestial bodies speaking through water. Life has always listened to these whispers, to time their movements with the tide, emerging when the water retreats to feed on what it leaves behind. Fish spawn when the moon and tide create safe currents for their young. Even coral reefs release their eggs in synchrony with lunar phases, guided by signals too subtle for us to see. For these creatures, the dialogue between moon and water is not abstract. It is the rhythm of survival, the language of existence written into their bodies and behaviours. Humans too have been listeners. Before we had instruments to measure or theories to explain, we noticed the connection. Ancient coastal peoples observed that the sea followed the moon, that the highest waters came with the full moon or the new. Myths were born from this observation, imagining the moon as a goddess who pulled the waters with her hands, or as a lover calling the sea to rise. Even when science later explained the truth of gravity, the poetry of those stories endured because the dialogue between moon and water feels more like a song than a calculation. But what makes this dialogue secret is not only its highlights, but its scale. It unfolds across hours, days, and centuries, too slow for us to hear directly. We measure it in the creeping edge of a shoreline, in the delay of 50 minutes each day as the moon moves in its orbit, in the gradual lengthening of days as tidal friction slows the Earth's spin. The whispers are drawn out, stretched across time, audible only when we learn to listen with patience. The ocean does not shout, it hums, and only in stillness can we feel its message. There is also a hidden intimacy in this dialogue. The ocean does not merely obey the moon, it also shapes it. The tides pull back on the moon, transferring energy, causing it to drift farther away in its orbit. Inch by inch the moon retreats, as though the ocean's answer pushes it gently outward. This reciprocity turns the dialogue into a relationship, not one-sided, but mutual. Earth and moon are partners in this exchange, their fates entwined, their movements altered by the whispers they share. On a human scale, we catch glimpses of this intimacy in small ways. A fisherman times his journey with the tide, listening to when the water will carry him safely to sea. A child plays at the edge of the surf, noticing how the ocean creeps closer to their toes as the moon rises higher. A poet watches the full moon and writes of longing, of return, of cycles. In all these moments, we are part of the same dialogue, listening without fully realizing, drawn into the rhythm that binds water to sky. If you imagine Earth from space, you can see the dialogue more clearly. Two bulges of water travelling around the globe, always facing toward and away from the moon, always shifting as Earth spins. It is as though the planet itself is breathing in time with its companion, not with lungs, but with oceans. This great inhalation and exhalation is constant, a steady voice that does not falter. To think of it is to feel awe, for it is a reminder that our world is not silent but alive with communication. And so the whispers between moon and water are both science and song. They are the measurable effects of gravity, predictable and precise, yet they are also poetry, a dialogue that touches life, culture, and imagination. To listen to the tide is to hear the moon speak, and to watch the sea rise and fall is to see the ocean answer. Their secret dialogue surrounds us, shaping the world, reminding us that even silence can be full of meaning, and that even the smallest whispers can shape the destiny of a planet. To deepen our listening to the whispers between moon and water, we must imagine the tide not as a single voice, but as a chorus. The ocean speaks in many tones, shaped by the shape of the land, the depth of the sea, and the seasons of the year. The moon pulls steadily, but the water answers differently depending on where it lives. In narrow bays, the whispers are amplified into shouts, while on wide open coasts they stretch into long sighs. Each place carries its own accent, its own way of translating the moon's command, and together they form the language of tides. In some harbours, the tide arrives with force, rushing inward as though eager to meet the land. The Bay of Fundy in Canada is one of these places, where tides can rise and fall more than 50 feet. The geography of the bay matches the rhythm of the tide perfectly, amplifying the lunar pull into dramatic surges. To stand on its shores is to hear the moon's whisper echoed back as a booming response, waves climbing rocks and retreating with astonishing speed. Here, the dialogue is not subtle but emphatic, a loud declaration of the moon's influence. Contrast this with the Mediterranean, where the enclosed sea muffles the tide, reducing it to mere inches. There the whisper is faint, almost hidden, like a secret known only to those who look closely. These differences remind us that the dialogue is not only celestial but earthly. The moon pulls on all oceans with equal intent, but the earth decides how those whispers are heard. Continents block and redirect tidal waves. Basins amplify or soften them. Underwater ridges deflect them. The result is a patchwork of voices, a world where no two tides are exactly alike. To listen across the planet is to hear countless interpretations of the same message, as though Earth itself is translating the moon's language into local dialects. Yet within this diversity, there is unity. All tides, no matter how small or great, follow the same rhythm of alignment. When the sun joins the moon in pulling, spring tides swell everywhere stronger than usual. When the sun pulls at an angle, neap tides quiet the ocean's response. These cycles remind us that the dialogue is not only between moon and water, but among three: sun, moon, and sea. The sun adds its voice to the chorus, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes softening, but always part of the song. The earth listens as the mediator, its spin and land masses shaping the sound. Life has evolved to hear these whispers clearly. Along tidal flats, clams and mussels open their shells when the tide returns, feeding on nutrients brought by the water. They close tightly when the tide recedes, waiting in silence for the ocean's return. Birds know to arrive when the tide is low, probing the exposed sand for worms and crabs. Fish migrate with the lunar cycle, their bodies attuned to currents stirred by gravitational pull. Even plants along the shore sway with the rhythm, their roots absorbing the gifts the tide delivers. For them, the whispers are not optional but essential, signals that guide survival. coral reefs tell a particularly striking story. Many species release their eggs and sperm simultaneously during certain moon phases, synchronizing across miles of reef. Scientists believe they are guided by both moonlight and tides, cues that ensure their offspring will drift safely with currents. This mass spawning is one of nature's most extraordinary events, a celebration of timing that could not exist without the dialogue between moon and water. It is as though the corals themselves have joined the conversation, adding their voices to the chorus of life. Humans too have lived by these whispers for millennia. Ancient navigators learned to read tides as signs, guiding their boats through shallow waters and across treacherous passages. Farmers planted by lunar calendars, believing the moon and tides influenced growth. In some cultures, the tides were woven into myths of creation, with gods or spirits breathing in and out to form the seas. Even today, modern technology has not diminished our reliance. Harbours cannot operate without tide tables. Coastal engineers build with tidal patterns in mind. Surfers and fishermen plan their days by the rise and fall of water. The dialogue may be ancient, but it still speaks to us as clearly now as it did to those who came before. But there is more to the whispers than what we see on the shore. Deep beneath the surface, tides stir the ocean in hidden ways. They drive currents through narrow straits, mix warm surface waters with cold depths, and shape the great circulations that regulate Earth's climate. These movements are invisible from the beach, but they are essential to life across the planet. Without them, nutrients would sink and settle, leaving surface waters barren. Instead, the tides act like a gentle stirring spoon, lifting nutrients upward, feeding plankton, and sustaining the entire marine food web. Even in the deep, the moon's voice is heard. There is also a reciprocity in this dialogue that humbles us. The ocean does not simply obey the moon, it pushes back. As the tides move across Earth's surface, friction slows the planet's rotation slightly. That energy does not vanish. It transfers to the moon, nudging it farther away in its orbit. Inch by inch, the moon drifts, as though carried by the ocean's response. This mutual influence turns the whispers into an exchange, a conversation where both parties change each other over time. Earth slows, the moon retreats, and the dialogue continues, shaping the destiny of both worlds. To sense this intimacy, imagine time stretched across billions of years. Long ago, the moon was closer, the tide stronger, the Earth's days shorter. As ages passed, the whispers between moon and water altered both, slowing Earth's spin, distancing the moon. In the far future, this exchange will continue until Earth and Moon face one another permanently, locked in eternal gaze, the tides forever frozen. Until then, we live within the ongoing dialogue, a moment in a story that spans cosmic time. What makes this dialogue profound is not only its science, but its symbolism. The tide reminds us that small, steady forces can change worlds. A whisper of gravity across space creates waves that carve coastlines, shape life, and alter the spin of a planet. It teaches that not all power is loud or sudden. Some power is gentle, persistent, and patient. In the same way, our own lives are shaped by quiet influences, habits, cycles, connections that we may not notice until we step back and listen. The dialogue between moon and water becomes a metaphor for the dialogues in our own lives, subtle but transformative. And so, when we stand at the edge of the sea and watch the tide rise, We are watching more than water. We are watching a conversation that has lasted longer than any human memory, a whisper carried across space, a rhythm felt in every drop. The moon leans close, the ocean answers, and together they shape the earth. To notice this is to notice the poetry of existence, the way even silence carries meaning, the way even whispers can speak louder than storms. As the dialogue between moon and water continues, it reveals itself not only in science but in the very shape of our world. Coastlines are written by the tide's pen, sculpted over millennia by its steady hand. Cliffs crumble where waves return again and again. Beaches stretch outward where sands are carried and laid down. Estuaries deepen where water pushes and pulls with each cycle. These changes may feel slow to us, but they are part of the ocean's reply, the Earth's visible answer to the moon's whispers. The dialogue is not only a soundless exchange, but also a form of creation, a way in which two bodies across space write upon the face of the planet. Consider the tidal rivers that pulse with this whisper. Twice a day the ocean pushes against their flow, sending salt water inland, changing their chemistry, reshaping their courses. Fish that swim in these rivers must adapt, able to live in shifting blends of salt and fresh water. Birds that feed along their banks must time their hunts to the tide's retreat. Entire ecosystems balance on this conversation, held together by the ebb and flow that never falters. Without tides, rivers would flow only one way, their worlds less diverse, less vibrant. With tides, they become places of renewal, renewed twice daily by the touch of the moon. In the polar regions, the dialogue takes a quieter form. Ice sheets feel the tide beneath them, rising and falling as the ocean moves below. Cracks open and close, waters slip in and out, and glaciers are slowly nudged by the lunar pull. Even the frozen ends of Earth are part of this whisper, responding in silence, their massive forms bending ever so slightly to the moon's request. These subtle shifts remind us that no place on Earth is untouched, that even the most remote and rigid landscapes are drawn into the conversation. Yet perhaps the most profound element of this dialogue is how it echoes through time. The whispers of the moon shaped the earliest rhythms of life on Earth. Before there were calendars, before there were clocks, organisms evolved in step with tides. Ancient creatures moved with lunar cycles, guided by the ocean's rise and fall. Fossils of early life show evidence of tidal flats where organisms first ventured onto land, drawn by the sea's retreat, then pulled back by its return. In this sense, the dialogue between moon and water helped guide life from the ocean to the shore, from the sea to the land, from one stage of evolution to another. The whispers did not only shape the Earth, they shaped life itself. And even now, life carries echoes of this dialogue. Certain marine worms breed only on nights of a full moon. Their bodies are tuned to both light and tide. Sea turtles return to the very beaches where they were born, their nesting timed with lunar cycles. Some fish migrate with spring tides, using the higher waters to move safely into estuaries. These instincts are not chance. They are responses to the moon's whispers, written into the very DNA of these creatures. The dialogue has lasted so long that it's become part of life's language, a script of survival carried from generation to generation. Humans too have inscribed the tide into their history. Ancient temples were built to align with lunar and tidal cycles, honouring the forces that govern survival. Seafarers charted courses based on tidal knowledge passed down as oral tradition. In some cultures, the moon was worshipped as a tidebringer, a divine presence whose whispers commanded both the seas and the fates of people. Even now, though we explain the mechanics with science, we continue to feel reverence. Festivals mark supermoons and harvest moons. Communities gather on shores to celebrate when tides rise unusually high or fall exceptionally low. The dialogue remains not only physical but spiritual, a reminder of our place within something larger. When storms arrive, this dialogue can turn dramatic. A storm surge combined with high tide can overwhelm coasts, flooding lands, reshaping human settlements. These moments remind us that whispers can carry power, that the dialogue is not always gentle. Yet even here the moon's role is steady, predictable, unchanged. The unpredictability comes from wind and weather, not from the tide itself. The moon continues to whisper, the water continues to answer, even when storms shout over them. In time the storm passes, and the tide returns to its patient rhythm, its conversation unbroken. Looking far ahead, scientists tell us that this dialogue will continue for billions of years, though it will slowly change. The moon will drift farther away, the tides will grow weaker, Earth's rotation will slow further. One day, long into the future, Earth and moon will face each other in stillness, locked in an eternal gaze. When that day comes, the tides as we know them will cease, the whispers fading into silence. But until then, we are living in a time when the dialogue is strong, when the whispers are clear, when the ocean still rises and falls in answer to the moon. This awareness brings both humility and wonder, to know that the water touching our feet at the shore is moving because of a force from space is to feel connection, to understand that we are part of a larger conversation, to know that this rhythm has shaped continents, guided evolution, and built cultures is to feel awe and to realize that something so subtle carries such weight. The whispers between moon and water may be secret in sound, but they are not secret in effect. Their influence is written everywhere, from the smallest tide pool to the grandest ocean basin. And so the dialogue continues. The moon leans close, its gravity tugging softly. The ocean listens and responds, rising and falling in endless reply. Together they create a rhythm that shapes the planet, sustains life, and reminds us of the quiet power of connection. We may not hear the words, but we can feel them in the sand beneath our feet, in the spray of salt air, in the steady return of the sea. To listen is to remember that whispers can change worlds, and that even the gentlest dialogue can echo across time and space. When we think of tides, our minds often turn first to the moon, that silver companion whose gentle gravity moves the oceans in endless cycles. Yet the moon is not alone in its work. The sun, vast and blazing, exerts its own pull across the earth. Though its distance softens its effect, its gravity is immense, and when it joins or opposes the moon, the ocean shifts in profound ways. The dance between sun and moon is written upon the water, shaping tides that swell with intensity or soften to a hush. These are the spring and neap tides, the shadows and echoes of celestial alignment. To see this dance, one must watch the sky. When the sun, moon and earth align in a straight line, either during the new moon when the moon hides in shadow, or the full moon when it shines fully lit, their pulls combine. The ocean feels both voices at once, and it responds with deeper breaths, higher high tides and lower low tides. These are called spring tides, not because of the season, but because the waters seem to spring forth, stretching farther than usual. The rhythm is stronger, the whispers louder, as if the moon and sun are singing together in harmony. 2 weeks later, when the moon has moved into its quarter phase, a right angle forms between sun and moon. Now the ocean is tugged in different directions, pulled both sideways and forward, as though caught in two conversations at once. The result is a softening, a gentler rhythm, tides that do not reach as high or sink as low. These are neap tides, the quiet responses in the cycle, moments when the ocean seems to rest, its heartbeat steady but subdued. In these times, the moon whispers one way and the sun another, and the sea chooses a middle path, neither extreme but balanced. The alternation between spring and neap tides is as old as the Earth-Moon system itself. Every 14 days, the ocean's response shifts, swelling in resonance with alignment, softening when the poles divide. This cycle is steady, predictable, and yet it feels like a dance, a choreography set by the heavens. To watch it is to see not only the moon's influence, but also the sun's hidden hand, working silently yet profoundly in partnership. The ocean is the stage, the water the dancer, and the music is gravity itself. For life along the shore, this dance is more than spectacle, it is necessity. Many creatures have tuned their lives to the spring and neap rhythm, knowing when waters will rise higher than usual or recede more gently. Some crabs time their egg releases to spring tides, ensuring that newborns are carried far out to sea by stronger currents. Shorebirds follow neap tides, when mudflats remain exposed for longer hours, rich with food. Even coral reefs seem to sense the rhythm, releasing their eggs during certain moon phases, when spring tides will carry them farther afield. The dance between sun and moon is not only written in water, but written in life itself. Humans too have long observed this pattern. Fishermen knew that the fortnightly cycle affected their catch, bringing larger harvests at spring tides. Farmers along tidal rivers noticed when high waters flood farther into their fields. Ancient navigators understood that alignment brought stronger currents, both helpful and dangerous. Without the concept of gravity, they nevertheless saw the evidence, marking lunar and solar cycles in stone, wood, and story. Even now, tide tables record not only the daily rise and fall, but also the waxing and waning of spring and neap tides. For ships and ports still depend on these rhythms as much as ancient canoes once did. Yet this dance is not uniform across the globe. In some places, spring tides bring dramatic floods, sweeping far inland, while in others the difference is subtle. Geography shapes the response, amplifying or muting the celestial pulls. Still, no matter where one stands, the pattern is present, written with quiet precision, unfolding every 2 weeks without fail. To live by the sea is to live by this rhythm, to mark time not only by days and months, but by the fortnightly dialogue between sun and moon. If you close your eyes and picture Earth from space, you might see the grey bulges of water pulled by the moon, shifting with the planet's rotation. Then imagine the sun aligning, its immense gravity joining the pull, stretching those bulges higher, deepening the breath. 2 weeks later, the sun and moon are at right angles, and the bulges soften, the ocean's chest rising and falling more gently. From that vantage, the dance is clear, a cosmic ballet played out on a planetary stage, beautiful in its simplicity, profound in its constancy. And so the tides remind us that we live in a system of relationships. No force acts in isolation, no body moves without affecting another. The whispers of the moon are echoed by the sun, the water listens, and the earth is shaped. Spring tides surge with energy, neap tides soften with calm, and together they form the breathing of our world. To notice this is to notice connection, the way every part of the cosmos speaks to every other, the way shadows and echoes combine to create harmony. The dance of spring and neap tides is not just science, it is poetry written on the sea, a reminder that the universe itself is choreographed in cycles of balance and beauty. To understand the dance of spring and neap tides more deeply, we must picture the ocean not as a flat expanse, but as a living body that responds to the gravity of two celestial partners. The moon tugs gently, drawing the sea upward in its orbit. The sun, far larger yet farther away, tugs as well. Sometimes their pulls align, sometimes they compete, and sometimes they cross. The ocean listens to both, never favouring one completely, but weaving their voices into a rhythm that repeats every fortnight. It is a rhythm of crescendos and rests, like music played upon the strings of earth. During spring tides, the alignment of sun and moon creates drama. Imagine standing at the shore on a night of a full moon. The water is higher than usual, creeping farther inland, reaching rocks that normally stay dry. The pull is stronger, the tide more forceful, the ocean's breath deeper. Hours later, the low tide is equally dramatic, exposing sandbanks and tidal flats that lie hidden on ordinary days. The range expands, the highs higher, the lows lower, the ocean exaggerating its movements as though speaking in a louder tone. These tides remind us that the moon does not act alone, but is strengthened by its fiery companion across the sky. Then, when the moon enters its quarter phases, the story softens. The sun pulls at right angles to the moon, and the ocean is caught between two directions. The result is compromise, a smaller rise and a gentler fall. The water still moves, but it does not stretch so far as though the sea is whispering instead of singing. These neap tides are quieter, subtler, less dramatic, but they carry their own beauty. They are moments of balance, pauses in the dance, intervals of rest between the larger movements of spring tides. In them, the ocean reminds us that calm is as important as force, that harmony includes both loud and soft notes. This fortnightly cycle is predictable, steady, yet endlessly fascinating. It is caused by simple geometry, by the alignment of celestial bodies, but it feels more like choreography. The sun and moon do not compete, they converse. When they align, they amplify each other, creating spring tides. When they diverge, they soften each other, creating neap tides. The ocean is the stage where their relationship is visible, and we are the audience, watching water rise and fall in patterns older than memory. For coastal life, this pattern is not just visible, but essential. Many species time their behaviours with spring and neap tides. Some fish use spring tides to carry their young into estuaries, trusting the stronger currents to distribute them widely. Certain crabs release larvae only on nights of spring tides, ensuring that the babies are swept quickly to sea, away from predators. Shorebirds take advantage of neap tides when feeding grounds remain uncovered longer, giving them extended time to gather food. The rhythm of fortnightly tides is not abstract, it is written into the cycles of survival, shaping instincts and migrations across the planet. Humans too have been attuned to this cycle for millennia. Ancient peoples noticed that the largest tides came with the full and new moons. Fishermen knew that some catches were best taken on spring tides, when the sea surged inland, while others were easier at neap tides, when currents slowed. Farmers along tidal rivers built calendars that marked these fortnightly rhythms, knowing when fields would flood or drain. In some cultures, rituals and festivals were aligned with spring tides. moments when the sea's extremes felt sacred, when the combined forces of sun and moon seemed closest to Earth. Without scientific explanation, they nevertheless understood the pattern, recognizing it as part of the natural order. Even in modern times, the cycle remains central. Ports rely on tide tables that mark spring and neap tides precisely, for ships cannot pass through certain channels except at high water. Engineers designing bridges and harbours account for these variations, knowing that forces are stronger during spring tides. Surfers, divers and sailors still live by these rhythms, adjusting their activities to the fortnightly dance. Our technology has changed, but the ocean's choreography has not. We are still bound to the cycle, still listening to the dialogue between sun, moon and water. What makes spring and neap tides especially poetic is their balance of extremes and calm. In spring tides, we see the ocean's power, the amplification of gravity, the dramatic shifts that reshape coasts and reveal hidden landscapes. In neap tides, we see its gentleness, the moderation that brings balance, the quiet intervals that allow ecosystems to breathe. Together, they form a cycle that is not only functional but meaningful, teaching us that strength and stillness both have their place. The dance would be incomplete without either. To feel this truth, imagine walking the same stretch of beach at different times in the lunar cycle. On a spring tide, the waves rush higher, the air salty with spray, the sand covered in kelp and shells washed far from sea. 2 weeks later, at a neap tide, the water seems restrained, the shore broader, the pools calmer. The same beach feels transformed, not by weather but by celestial alignment. To notice this is to witness the touch of the cosmos upon the earth, written not in stars but in sand and water. Deep beneath the waves, the fortnightly rhythm shapes currents that influence the entire ocean. Stronger tides during spring phases stir waters more vigorously, mixing nutrients and driving circulation. Weaker tides during neap phases allow layers to settle, creating calmer conditions in bays and estuaries. These alternations sustain ecosystems, providing variety and balance. Life depends not on constancy alone, but on change, on cycles that offer both abundance and rest. The dialogue between sun and moon ensures this, keeping the ocean not static but dynamic, not silencient but alive. And so, as we observe the dance of spring and neap tides, we see more than a physical phenomenon. We see a lesson in relationship, in balance, in cooperation. The moon is gentle, the sun immense, yet together they shape the same ocean. Sometimes they amplify, sometimes they soften, but always they act in concert, their dialogue carried by the water. It is a reminder that forces need not oppose to create beauty. They can join or balance, strengthen or quiet, and in doing so they create harmony. This harmony is what gives the ocean its endless variety, its endless fascination. The tide is never exactly the same twice, always shifting with the phases of the moon, the position of the sun, the shape of the coast. Yet within this variety is predictability, a certainty that the cycle will continue, that spring will follow neap, that neap will follow spring, forever repeating as long as earth, moon and sun remain bound. To watch this cycle is to watch eternity in miniature, a fortnightly echo of cosmic time. In the end, the dance of spring and neap tides is a gift. It gives us knowledge, allowing us to predict, plan and live with the ocean. It gives us beauty, painting the shore with alternating patterns of abundance and calm. And it gives us meaning, reminding us that we are part of a universe of relationships, a system where even the mightiest bodies listen to one another and act together. The whispers of the moon, the shadows of the sun, the echoes in the water, all are part of the same song. To listen is to hear the universe breathing through the sea. As the cycle of spring and neap tides continues, it reveals not only the precision of celestial mechanics, but also the poetry of balance. Every 2 weeks, the ocean shifts from power to calm, from strong surges to gentle flows. It is a rhythm that feels almost like breathing, a pattern of exertion followed by rest. To live by the sea is to live by this rhythm, to see in its movements a reflection of harmony between extremes. When the spring tides come, the sea seems restless. High waters press against sea walls, flooding marshes, carrying driftwood and kelp far inland. Fishermen find their nets stretched by stronger currents, harbours buzz with activity, and beaches vanish beneath the advancing surf. Then, when the tide retreats, it does so with equal intensity, leaving behind wide flats of sand, tide pools brimming with life, and channels carved deeper by the flowing water. These moments remind us of the ocean's power, its ability to reshape landscapes, not with violence but with persistence, not in hours but in centuries. Spring tides are the ocean's voice raised to fullness, its song amplified by both sun and moon. In contrast, the neap tides arrive like a sigh. The water does not climb as high, nor does it fall as low. The shore is more stable, the waves quieter, the current softer. For the creatures of the intertidal zone, these times are gentler, offering reprieve from the extremes of spring tides. Mudflats remain uncovered longer, allowing shorebirds to feed in peace. Estuaries stay calm, giving young fish safer places to grow. Even humans sense the difference. Boats move with less urgency. Fishermen find the sea more predictable, and the horizon feels steadier. Neap tides are the ocean's softer words, the moments when its dialogue with the sky takes a gentler tone. This alternation of force and rest is not accidental. It is the product of alignment, the geometry of Earth, Moon and Sun arranged in a cosmic cycle. The Sun's pull, though weaker than the Moon's in tidal effect, is still immense. When it aligns, the Moon's whispers become louder. When it turns aside, the whispers soften. Together they create a rhythm of variation, a fortnightly dance that ensures the ocean is never monotonous, never still. Variety itself is the gift of their partnership, a reminder that beauty lies not in constancy alone but in change. The influence of spring and neap tides is felt far beyond the shoreline. Oceanographers have discovered that these cycles affect deep-sea currents, stirring the water more vigorously during spring tides, allowing nutrients to rise and mix. During neap tides, the ocean rests, layers remain more distinct, and circulation slows. This alternation provides balance, preventing stagnation while avoiding constant turbulence. It is like a great stirring spoon, moving in steady patterns, keeping the ocean alive. Without these cycles, the distribution of nutrients across the globe would be different, altering the foundation of the food chain. The fortnightly rhythm, then, is not just a surface phenomenon, but a planetary process. The dialogue of sun and moon also reaches into human culture. Sailors once planned their voyages by spring tides, using the extra water to pass through shallow harbours. Farmers time plantings with neap tides, believing calmer waters influence the fertility of the land. Today, engineers designing tidal energy systems account for these cycles, knowing that spring tides produce more power, while neap tides bring less. Even in our age of technology, the fortnightly rhythm remains central, reminding us that we live within a cosmos of predictable, dependable forces. What is most striking is how the alternation between spring and neap tides mirrors patterns we see everywhere in nature. Just as the heart beats in cycles of contraction and release, just as breath alternates between inhalation and exhalation, the ocean too has its rhythm of extremes and calm. It is a universal truth. Energy is not constant but flows in waves, in rises and falls, in pulses. The spring and neap tides embody this truth on a planetary scale, showing us that the cosmos itself follows patterns of ebb and flow. On a personal level, to watch the fortnightly cycle is to be reminded of patience. 2 weeks may seem short in cosmic terms, but for us it is a noticeable interval, a rhythm we can observe with our own eyes. To see the ocean swell higher 1 week and soften the next is to mark time not with clocks, but with nature's pulse. It is to reconnect with the way our ancestors lived, guided by cycles larger than themselves, trusting the sun and moon to keep time. In this way, the spring and neap tides are not only a physical phenomenon, but also a calendar, a teacher of rhythm and trust. As with all tides, this cycle has shaped life. Species that depend on extremes thrive during spring tides, while those that prefer calm flourish during neap tides. Together, these alternating conditions create diversity, preventing one form of life from dominating, ensuring balance in ecosystems. The variation sustains richness, just as alternating seasons sustain life on land. The fortnightly dance is a small season within each month, a microcosm of change that nourishes both sea and shore. Looking further, the cycle of spring and neap tides carries a lesson about cooperation. The moon and sun do not compete but contribute. Their forces may align or diverge, but both are necessary for the whole. The extremes of spring tides would not exist without their combined pull, nor would the calm of neap tides without their separation. Together they teach us that harmony is not always uniform. It can be built from differences, from alternating voices, from contrast as much as from similarity. The ocean reflects this truth each fortnight, reminding us that balance is created through relationship. And so the dance continues. The sun shines with blazing energy, the moon glides with quiet grace, and the ocean responds with movements of power and gentleness. Spring tides surge with drama, neap tides soothe with calm, and together they create the endless rhythm of Earth's seas. To live in awareness of this cycle is to live in awareness of the cosmos, to see the connection between sky and sea, between gravity and life, between forces beyond our control and the rhythms that shape our days. In the end, the spring and neap tides are not only about physics but about poetry. They remind us that extremes are balanced by calm, that power is softened by rest, that cycles are essential for harmony. They show us that even the mightiest forces of the cosmos act in partnership, shaping the world not through domination but through dialogue. To stand at the shore and watch the fortnightly rhythm is to witness the universe itself moving in waves of balance. It is to hear the echoes of the moon, to see the shadows of the sun, and to know that together they dance upon the water, forever shaping the song of the sea. The edge of the sea is a place of constant change. Here, where land meets water, the tide rules all. Twice each day the ocean advances, flooding rocks, beaches, marshes. Twice each day it retreats, exposing sands, shells, and hidden pools. This shoreline is not fixed, but living, breathing in rhythm with the moon and the sun. It is a boundary that never stands still, a place shaped endlessly by the whisper of tides. To walk along it is to witness life adapting to change, to see how creatures and landscapes mould themselves to the ocean's slow heartbeat. At high tide, the sea covers the shore, cloaking rocks and plants in its salty embrace. Fish swim closer to land, riding currents that bring food and safety. Crabs scuttle across submerged sand, while anemones open their tentacles to feed. At low tide, the water slips away, leaving behind tide pools that shimmer with trapped life and mudflats rich with worms and clams. Birds descend to feed, probing the exposed ground, while humans wander to collect shells or seaweed. This endless transformation is not chaos, but pattern, a predictable rhythm that life has come to trust. Every creature at the shoreline knows its timing, living by the pull of the moon. The shoreline itself is built by tides. Waves deposit sand in some places, carrying it away in others, shaping beaches and dunes. In estuaries, tides carry sediment upstream, building fertile flats that become nurseries for young fish and crustaceans. In marshes, they flood grasses that filter water and provide homes for countless small creatures. Mangrove forests rise in tropical tidal zones, their roots anchored in mud that is covered and uncovered with each cycle. Coral reefs thrive in tidal seas, nourished by the nutrients that the shifting water delivers. Without tides, these landscapes would wither. With them, they flourish, sustained by the constant exchange of water, energy, and life. For the creatures that live here, survival depends on adapting to the tide's rhythm. Barnacles glue themselves to rocks, shutting tight when the tide recedes, opening only when water returns. Mussels cluster in beds, their shells clamped shut until the waves wash over them again. Starfish cling with suctioned arms, moving slowly across stones that shift from sea to air and back again. Tiny fish dart in tide pools, trapped until the ocean returns to release them. Each has learned patience, endurance, and trust in the cycle. Their lives are built not in spite of the tide, but because of it. The shoreline is also a place of abundance. Nutrients from the deep ocean are carried to the shallows with each rising tide, feeding plankton, which in turn feed fish, birds, and whales. Organic matter is swept outward with the ebb, nourishing distant waters. This constant exchange makes the edge of the sea one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. Estuaries, salt marshes, and tidal flats teem with life because of this richness. Migratory birds travel thousands of miles to feed here, timing their journeys with the lunar calendar. Fish spawn in tidal zones, ensuring their young have food and shelter. Life at the shoreline is tuned like an instrument, playing in harmony with the sea's rise and fall. Humans have long depended on this living shoreline. Ancient peoples gathered clams and oysters from mud flats, fished in tidal rivers, and built their settlements near estuaries rich in food. They watched the tides carefully, learning when the ocean would reveal its treasures. Many cultures created myths of sea gods who controlled the rising waters, or moon goddesses who guided the tides. Even now, millions of people around the world live near tidal zones, building livelihoods from fisheries, salt harvesting, and trade that depends on predictable tides. The shoreline is not just a place of beauty, but of sustenance, offering food, shelter, and opportunity. But the shoreline is also fragile. Because it is always changing, it is vulnerable to shifts in climate, to rising seas, to storms that ride on high tides. Marshes can drown if water rises too quickly. Coral reefs can bleach if tides no longer bring enough nutrients. Coastal communities can flood when spring tides meet storms. Yet within this fragility lies resilience. The shoreline has survived countless changes in Earth's history. Ice ages, sea level shifts, storms and quakes. Life adapts, moves and rebuilds. The tide continues its rhythm, and with it, the living shoreline continues to grow and transform. To stand at the shoreline is to feel connection. You can sense the land beneath your feet, firm and rooted, and the sea before you, vast and restless. Between them is a zone that belongs to neither fully but to both, a place defined by movement, by transition, by relationship. It is a reminder that nothing in nature is fixed, that boundaries are illusions, that life thrives not in rigid lines but in flowing cycles. The tide teaches us that change is not loss but renewal, that what recedes will return, that every departure carries the promise of return. So the living shoreline becomes a symbol. It is science and survival, ecosystem and economy, but it is also metaphor. It tells us that we too live at edges, between certainty and uncertainty, between fullness and emptiness, between calm and change. Like the creatures of the tide, we must learn to adapt, to trust rhythms larger than ourselves, to find nourishment in the cycles that carry us forward. To watch the shoreline is to see the world as it truly is. Not fixed, not still, but living, breathing, and beautiful in its endless change. To look more closely at the living shoreline is to see how it is a place of constant negotiation, where land and sea meet and trade gifts twice each day. With every tide, the ocean delivers nutrients, sediments, and life to the shore. With every ebb, the shore releases material back to the sea. This exchange is not wasteful but vital, a conversation between two worlds that sustains countless forms of life. The shoreline is not static, it is process, movement and transformation. To walk it is to walk a boundary that is alive. When the tide rises, the shoreline expands, swallowing fields of grass, flooding channels and washing into estuaries. The water brings with it food, microscopic plankton, drifting seaweed, dissolved minerals. For filter-feeding animals, this is a feast. Mussels, oysters and clams open their shells, drawing in the tide, filtering out nourishment and cleansing the water as they do. Fish ride the incoming surge, exploring creeks and marshes for food and shelter. Crabs and shrimp climb higher into the intertidal zone, knowing that the water will protect them for a time. The shore is transformed into ocean, and its inhabitants rejoice in the abundance. Then, as the tide falls, the shoreline retreats, leaving behind a new world. Mudflats glisten in the sun, alive with worms, snails, and burrowing creatures. Birds arrive in flocks, probing the wet earth with their beaks, feasting on what the tide has revealed. Pools remain in rocky hollows, each one a small world sheltering starfish, anemones, and tiny fish until the sea returns. Predators know to come then, foxes and raccoons along some coasts, humans with buckets and nets, each drawn by the gifts the ocean leaves behind. The retreat of the tide is not an ending, but an opening, an invitation to those who thrive on the exposed shore. Over time, this constant give and take shapes the land itself. Sandbars form where currents deposit their load, only to be swept away months later when storms arrive. Marshes grow where tides bring silt layer upon layer, until plants take root and anchor the soil. Mangrove forests expand as roots trap sediment, building land from the sea's offerings. Coral reefs grow taller as tidal waters deliver fresh nutrients. The living shoreline is not fixed but continually built, broken, and rebuilt by the rhythm of the tide. It is a reminder that permanence is an illusion, that the truest stability lies in constant change. The creatures of the shoreline live in intimate partnership with this rhythm. Barnacles cement themselves to rocks, their shells close tight against the sun during low tide, opening eagerly when the waves return. Seaweed clings to stones, limp and dry in the air, revived and flowing when submerged again. Crabs scurry into burrows as the water drains, waiting for its return. Shorebirds memorize the timing, arriving just as mudflats emerge, leaving when the tide swallows them again. Each species has found its place in the cycle, each life a response to the moon's pull. The living shoreline is a symphony of adaptation, an orchestra conducted by gravity. Humans too have written their lives into this cycle. In some places, entire communities were built around clam gardens, stone terraces constructed to enhance shellfish growth by managing tidal flow. In others, fish traps were laid in estuaries, designed to catch fish as the tide retreated. Farmers used tidal flooding to irrigate fields, harnessing the sea's rise and fall. Traders built ports at estuaries where ships could ride the tides inland. The shoreline has always been a partner in human survival, offering food, transport, and shelter, but only to those who respected its rhythm. Even today we remain dependent. Modern ports use tidal charts to guide ships through narrow channels. Coastal fisheries rely on tidal spawning grounds. Engineers design tidal energy systems to capture power from the moving sea. Tourists visit tidal landscapes, marveling at their beauty, photographing beaches that transform within hours. We may no longer build our calendars around the tide as ancient peoples did, but we still live by it, often without realizing. The shoreline continues to shape economies, cultures, and imaginations, even in an age of technology. What makes the living shoreline extraordinary is not only its richness, but its resilience. Despite being one of the most changeable environments on Earth, it supports immense diversity. Life has learned not to resist the tide, but to embrace it, to bend and adapt, to thrive in transition. It teaches us that flexibility is strength, that endurance comes not from stillness but from movement. To live at the shoreline is to live with change and to make peace with it. This lesson is written in every shell, every marsh blade, every ripple of sand left by the sea. Yet the shoreline is also vulnerable. Climate change and rising seas threaten to drown marshes and erode beaches faster than they can rebuild. Pollution carried by rivers settles in tidal flats, harming the creatures that filter and feed. Human development hardens coasts with seawalls, cutting off the natural give and take of tide and land. The living shoreline can suffer when its rhythm is broken, when its conversation with the ocean is silenced. But even here, there is hope. Restoration projects rebuild marshes, plant mangroves, and remove barriers, allowing tides to resume their work. When given space and time, the shoreline heals, for its essence is renewal. To stand at the living shoreline is to stand in awe of connection. Land and sea, moon and sun, creatures and humans, all meet here, all depend on this place. It is where cycles are visible, where change is constant, where life is woven together by the simple rise and fall of water. The shoreline shows us that boundaries are not barriers but bridges, not endings but beginnings. It teaches us to see change not as loss but as rhythm, as music, as life's deepest truth. And so the living shoreline continues, shaped by tides that never stop, sustained by cycles that never break. Twice each day the ocean reaches out to touch the land, and twice each day it pulls back only to return again. In that rhythm, worlds are created, sustained and transformed. In that rhythm we can find wisdom, humility and peace. The living shoreline is a teacher, a reminder that to live fully is to live with change, to accept the ebb and flow, and to trust that every retreat is followed by return. To truly understand the living shoreline, we must pause and watch it, not for moments, but for hours. A beach at dawn may seem quiet, its sand smooth and unbroken, but by noon the tide has crept upward, covering footprints, pulling kelp from the deep, wrapping rocks in foam. By evening the sea is withdrawn again, leaving pools that shimmer like glass, birds feeding where waves had crashed only hours earlier. This is not a performance, it is life unfolding, shaped by cycles older than humanity, deeper than thought and steadier than breath. The living shoreline is Earth's edge in motion, an unceasing poem of water, land and time. Each tide that rises breathes life into the shore. Salt water seeps into the sand, feeding microscopic organisms that form the base of the food chain. Algae bloom across submerged stones, catching sunlight and fueling the energy of the ecosystem. Fish swim in with the flood, feeding on what drifts in the moving water. Invertebrates rise from burrows to filter the tide's bounty. With every rise the ocean gives, and with every fall it reveals. Life at the shoreline thrives not by resisting these changes, but by weaving itself into them. The boundary becomes a cradle of constant creation. In marshes, the story deepens. As the tide floods the grasses, tiny snails climb higher, floating on the rising water or gripping stalks to avoid drowning. Fiddler crabs retreat to their muddy homes, waiting for the moment to emerge and feed. When the water recedes, it leaves a carpet of silt, fresh with nutrients. Grasses draw in what the tide has left, growing stronger with each cycle. The marsh breathes with the moon, expanding and contracting like lungs. These wetlands are not fragile, they are alive with resilience designed to absorb flood, filter pollution and shelter life. And all of it depends on the dependable pull of gravity and time. Further inland, estuaries show another face of the living shoreline. These places, where freshwater rivers meet the sea, pulse with tidal energy. The mixing of fresh and salt water creates a unique environment rich in oxygen and nutrients. Juvenile fish find safety here, hidden among reeds and roots. Birds nest in the trees above, diving for fish when the tide reveals them. Otters play in quiet pools, and the occasional dolphin swims upstream with the rising tide. Estuaries are places of transition, of beginnings, and the tide is their keeper, ensuring they remain dynamic and alive. In colder regions, the tide shapes rocky shores. There, tide pools form with every ebb, each one a small world filled with surprises. Starfish stretch across barnacle-covered rocks, anemones open their flowery arms, and tiny shrimp dart through strands of seaweed. These pools may seem still, but they are worlds of constant tension. Heat, sunlight, salinity, all shift dramatically over the course of a day. Only the hardiest survive, and yet, in their survival, they show us something remarkable. That life can thrive where conditions are not stable but rhythmic. These creatures do not fear change, they live by it. Coral reefs too are shaped by the tide. Though they lie beneath the surface most of the time, tides influence how water flows through their branches. At low tide, some reef tops are exposed, warmed by the sun, touched by air. At high tide, currents sweep across, bringing plankton and oxygen. This variation prevents stagnation, keeps life flowing and strengthens the entire system. Reefs become not just structures but breathing beings, rising and falling with the sea, each coral polyp a participant in the rhythm. In this way, even the most complex marine cities are tuned to the movement of the tide. But the living shoreline is not only a place of survival, it is a place of story. Every shell washed onto the beach carries a history. Every ripple in the sand tells of a wave that passed. The driftwood speaks of distant forests, carried by rivers to the sea and returned by the tide. Footprints disappear and reappear, stories written and erased by water. The shoreline is a storyteller, revealing and concealing, whispering tales of motion and memory. To listen is to be drawn into a language without words, to sense time not as a clock but as a cycle. In many cultures, the shoreline holds sacred meaning. It is seen as the threshold between worlds, the place where the known meets the unknown, where earth touches water, where body meets spirit. Rituals are performed at the edge of the sea, prayers offered with the tide. Birth and death are symbolized by waves. Even now, people come to the beach to think, to grieve, to dream. The rhythm of the tide becomes a kind of comfort, a reminder that nothing stays the same, but that everything comes around again. The ocean leaves and the ocean returns. So do we. There is wisdom in this. The shoreline teaches that adaptation is not weakness but strength. The organisms that survive here do not build walls. They bend, shift, move with the water. The plants hold loosely to the sand, not to resist the tide but to go with it. The birds follow the rhythm, not trying to control it but listening, responding. This is a different kind of intelligence, one rooted in timing and sensitivity rather than dominance. In a world that often values control, the shoreline whispers another truth, that balance is found in flexibility and peace in flow. As climate change accelerates, the living shoreline becomes even more vital. Rising seas, stronger storms, shifting weather patterns, all threaten these dynamic edges, and yet, if protected and restored, the shoreline can protect us in return. Marshes absorb storm surges, mangroves buffer waves, oyster beds filter water. The very features shaped by the tide become our allies in resilience. The more we understand the living shoreline, the more we realize we are not separate from it. We are part of its story, and it is part of ours. To preserve this place, we must allow it to move. Shorelines are not meant to be frozen in place by concrete and steel. They must breathe. Restoration projects now aim to work with tides, not against them. Replanting grasses, reconnecting estuaries, moving barriers. These efforts are not about recreating the past, but allowing the future to unfold in motion. When the tide is allowed to return, life follows. The moon pulls, the water answers, and the shoreline sings again. And so, the living shoreline remains one of Earth's greatest teachers. It shows us the power of rhythm, the necessity of change, and the beauty of edges. It is where cycles touch the ground, where gravity becomes visible, where the quiet voice of the universe can be felt in the shifting sands. To visit it is to be reminded that life is movement, that home can exist in change, that belonging is found in listening to the tides. As the last wave of the day laps against the shore, the lesson is complete. The sun lowers, the tide begins its retreat, and the beach stretches wide once more. Creatures move, birds call, the air thickens with salt and silence. The shoreline breathes out, waiting for the next breath to come, and it will, because the tide always returns, and with it the story continues, quietly, steadily, beautifully, on the living edge of the sea.